The 5th Bioceuticals Research Symposium will be held from the 21st to the 23rd of April 2017 in Sydney. This promises to be another sellout event. For more information, including registration, go to the Education tab at bioceuticals.com.au. This is FX Medicine. I'm Andrew Whitfield Cook. Joining me on the line today is Cyndi O'Meara, who's a nutritionist, best-selling author, international speaker and founder of Changing Habits. But she's not your typical nutritionist. Cyndi disagrees with low-fat, calorie-counting diets. She believes chocolate can be good for you and thinks cheating and eating yummy foods is an important part of a well-balanced diet, and I already love her. Cyndi must be doing something right because she maintains a healthy weight and has never in her whole life taken an antibiotic, painkiller or any other form of medication. Cyndi graduated with a Bachelor of Science majoring in nutrition from Deakin University in 1984. Her special interest was ancestral foods. At the end of her degree, she was so disillusioned by the nutritional guidelines that she paved her own path and stayed clear of the low-fat diets of the day, and not without controversy. Her groundbreaking book, Changing Habits, Changing Lives, became an instant bestseller, and from there she's grown a successful organic food company, certified online education program and groundbreaking documentary. Cyndi is about educating. Her greatest love is to teach people in order for them to make better choices in their life so they too can enjoy greater health throughout their life. Her unique, surprisingly simple and down-to-earth approach challenges and encourages others to eliminate unhealthy habits and has inspired thousands to make smarter choices about the food they choose to put into their body. Welcome, Cyndi. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you, Andrew.
Now, Cyndi, I've got to say we've had a chat just briefly beforehand, and there's a little bit of a tie there in a couple of geographical areas.
Yeah.
Tell me about your beginning. Like, you're from Bendigo. What inspired you to learn about nutrition? Tell me about your education and where along that line, where along that course did you lose faith in what was being taught?
Well, I think it was the way I was brought up. I was brought up by a father who was a pharmacist who, after 6 years of dishing out medications and realising they weren't working, just creating more problems, and this was back in the 50s, he was way ahead of his time.
Wow, yeah.
He became a chiropractor, went to the USA, became a chiropractor, met my mother over there and came back to Australia. And my mum was from a farming family. She was the oldest of 11. She cooked everything from scratch. My dad was of the philosophy of vitalism, which is that we just don't look at one organ, we look at the whole body, the connections within that body, the connections to other people, the earth, the moon, stars. He was in the 60s, probably your typical hippie, but didn't look like one. You know, he looked very conservative. So I think it was my upbringing that really paved the way. And I knew that I wanted to do something with health, but I didn't want to be a chiropractor. I didn't want to follow in my father's steps.
Yeah.
And I wanted to ski, so I ended up going to the US and went to the University of Colorado, and I actually did a year there where I did cultural anthropology, and that's what got me interested in nutrition.
Right.
It wasn't, it was like, I want to be a dietitian. That's what I want to be. So came back to Australia and did the degree. But after doing cultural anthropology and ancestral foods and understanding my father's philosophy and what my mum did with cooking, and I was being told to use margarine, low fat, all of these medical feeds that I looked at like sustagen, and I was just horrified. And I thought, I can't become a dietitian. I don't even agree with any of this. Not knowing that I could go off on my own and do my own thing. Went back to university, did 2 more years where I cut up cadavers. I wanted to know more about the human body. And at the end of cutting up cadavers and doing all pathology, histology, embryology, I went, you know what? After this many years of university, I actually know what nutrition is important for the human body. And so I did. I went off on my own way and started to teach in 1984 to my clients how to eat real foods. So that was, back in 1984, I was saying go back to butter, let's not do low fat, let's have a look at how these foods are produced, go and find the best quality. And I think what really got me was I had a farmer that came in, and I was a young 24-year-old. He was in his 70s. He was in a lot of pain. His leg was numb, and no one was helping him. So his daughter sent him in to me. Yeah. And I spoke to him for an hour. He had his arms and legs crossed, and I was quite intimidated by him. And he was a farmer that had come from Shepparton to Melbourne. And about a week after he left, I didn't think he was going to listen to me. And about a week after he left, he rang me and he said, Miss Lovett, because that was my name, I want to speak to you. And I'm thinking, oh, gosh, So he came down and he saw me and he said, I want to tell you a story. He said, I'm a pear farmer. 5 years ago, I realised that my pears were the worst. I need to use every chemical, every spray, everything on them in order for them to even, sprout and be pears. And he said, I decided to go back to my old ways. And what I did was I cleaned up my farm. I got rid of all the chemicals. I pruned all my trees. 5 years later, I had the best pears in the district. Wow. And he said, what an idiot I was that I didn't do it to my own body. He says, I'm going to do everything that you told me. Wow. So, that got me even more into the agricultural side and the production side of our food because of that man. And I remember his name. His name was Mr. Rutherford. So, yeah, he was an integral part of my life.
Shout out to Mr. Rutherford.
And there were many others. Yeah, Mr. Rutherford, I don't think he'd be alive, I'm 56 now, so that was 30 years ago. He'd have to be 100 and something. Yeah. But, I also came from a family that my mum was the oldest of 11, 7 were boys, 6 were hemophiliac. And they were in the middle of the chemical revolution where DDT was being sprayed as well. That was the 40s. And in the 30s, they sprayed arsenic and I think it was lead. It was arsenic and lead that they sprayed on a plague of locusts. And my mother, was in amongst all of this. All the chemicals were being sprayed on her. And I look at that whole family and they've all died young, of some sort of disability, AIDS as far as the haemophilia goes. But my mum, she died of lung cancer. My sister, who was born in Iowa, and the firstborn, she died of CREST, which is an acronym for 5 autoimmune diseases. So I think that's what's really pushed me, is that I have a really pathetic genetic potential.
Right.
Really pathetic. And I wanted to see, how could I be the best that I can be without, being a slave to my genes? And so I did everything I could possibly do in order to be the best version of myself, given that my father gave me a great start. My mum, cooked everything from scratch. And I guess that's the really thing that propels me, is that it was about me being the best and understanding how I could be the best, giving that to my children. And then the next was my mother's group, and then the local paper, and then a book, and now a movie. So I think it's about me learning and then just spreading that knowledge.
Yeah. I got to say, Cyndi, when I was learning nursing, you would have been one of those different people in the class. And there were a couple that I would have laughed at going, ha ha, you hippie, well, I'm learning the true way. And it was over a decade later that I used to actually hassle somebody, a friend whose girlfriend was basically a naturopath, and I used to hassle him about it. And it was years later, a decade later, when I had to go cap in hand and apologise most humbly for my arrogance. What interests me is that it's these different thinkers that they're ridiculed at the time, and then later, of course, it's, we know that. Of course we know that. That's scientific fact. Now, I guess the thing is that along the way there is going to be some idiots who are just idiots. But your stuff, the thing that you've done, has now been validated by countless studies, including hardcore studies like the Sydney Diet Heart Study? that's basically saying, no, these decades of omega-6 fatty acids that we've been preaching is wrong. There's no benefit. So, where you must have copped a lot of ridicule.
Hey, I still cop ridicule. I think there's a page dedicated to me and they just absolutely slander anything that I say. But you know what? That's okay. I'm not there to change those guys. I'm there to change the people that really want to be changed. And the health insurance companies, they're multi-billion-dollar companies, and they've figured out there are three types of people that can be insured on or in Australia on this planet. The first one is the people like me who do everything right. They eat right, they exercise every day, they have sunshine, they do everything they can possibly do to be the healthiest version of themselves. Then there's the people that they're trying, but they're not getting there, but they're open to suggestion and to education.
Yep.
And then there's the ones that just go, oh, I'll smoke and I'll drink and I'll do drugs, I'll do whatever I want. I'm not doing anything to change. So the health insurance companies have decided there are only two groups that they want to insure. And that's the top two groups, not that third group. They don't want them. And I don't want them either because they don't want to change. There's no point in me even considering trying to get to that group because they're just hard work and in the end they just ridicule. It's the group that are open to suggestion. Hey, perhaps you have this autoimmune disease and perhaps, I don't know if you've seen the latest scientific research on it, but there's a link to gluten or there's a link to glyphosate or there's a link to whatever that link might be. And then they go, oh, tell me more.
Yeah.
I want to, I don't want to be on these drugs for the rest of my life. I actually want to be the best version of myself, but I don't know what to do.
And I think that's part of it. As long as you can back up what your claims are with some basis in science, in the literature, to say no, it's further than what you're being told by the media and the machine, if you like, of commercialism. It's more than this. Have a look at this. That I think is the responsible sort of way to go for a practitioner. I get, indeed, a friend of my wife got caught up in nothing less than charlatanism when she was, treating herself, quote unquote, with cancer. Despite my protestations that she should be seeking medical help and using natural medicines to support her body. So she got caught up on this sort of bandwagon. It was almost like a false hope, a sort of last grasp at hope. But where you can validate something and say, no, look at this. There is some stuff. There is some basis in this. Goodman Fielders are not going to promote this because it doesn't sell tip-top bread. You know what I mean? That's I think, the responsible thing. And this is where you've come from, You're obviously passionate about food, but you go more into it's just food. You go from sourcing it, where do you get the good food from? And I think this is a major hurdle that a lot of people come across. So let's chat about that for a tick. Where do you, for most of the people who need this stuff, how do they source good, wholesome food?
Oh, it depends on where you live, but I do know people who are so committed to their health that no matter what, they'll do it. So I have a friend who lives on 1.5 million acres in the middle of Queensland, and the way she gets this food is she has a garden, and so I think a herb garden, a veggie, like just a little veggie patch, the old-fashioned way we used to do things, is a really good way of sourcing good quality foods because you know exactly the production of it.
Yeah.
Another one is our farmers markets, going and talking to our farmers. More and more there are farmers out there that are not giving their produce to the big supply chains, but rather going, I can make more money by going to the local farmers markets because everybody's seeking a better quality of food. Now, they may not be organically certified, but at least they can say to you, no, I don't spray such and such a herbicide or pesticide. This is what I do. And so you're knowledgeable on that. So, I think that's the next place to get it. And I've just found a beautiful place here on the Sunshine Coast. And it's a shop that finds backyard growers who have a real keen interest in chemical-free and organic as they sell to her and then she sells to to us. So, there are people out there that don't want to be gardeners, and so these are a really good alternative. But back in the 80s when I first started this, I would just say to people, well, at least start eating fruits and vegetables. Get off your breads and your breakfast cereals and your pastas and your muffins and your cakes, and let's just start eating fruits and vegetables. And I'd send them to anywhere to get them, because at least that was a start.
Mm.
But now I'm just finding from the 80s to now, that doesn't cut it anymore. We are in such a predicament with health and crisis with our health, because I think of a generational effect and an epigenetic effect, that we have to go that one step further. And if somebody is in crisis, they're going to have to seek out the best food.
Yeah.
If you're not in crisis, then maybe, we can do it slowly. But when you're in crisis, you have to do this.
Mm-hmm. One of the things, just thinking about your comment there about making a garden, I was recently down in Melbourne and I went to a cafe in Fitzroy. And this cafe, when I got the menu, the first page of the menu basically said menu, and underneath it had, first of all, we'd really like to thank all of our biodynamic and organic suppliers. And it was a list. It was a huge list. And I'm going, wow. Now, the comment that I'm going to make is the food. It wasn't just beautifully prepared, but the tomatoes were richer. They actually tasted like a tomato rather than a red baggage of sod. You know how you taste the difference?
Yeah.
Even the lettuce, there was a real bitterness to it. And it was just this, oh God, it was yummy. And I just think I'm not saying there's no excuse, but even in urban environments, you can find the stuff. You can't say you can't find the stuff at all, if these cafes can make a business based on that.
Yeah, there's a really good documentary on this, and it's called Homegrown. And I think it's been out I remember watching it years and years ago, and it's about a father who was bringing up 3 children, and he wasn't making it as far as getting food. So he produced this amazing garden in the middle of Los Angeles on a 600 square block, and it fed his family in the end. He was able to figure out how to do it. It's just worth seeing that sometimes we look past that, and all it needs is us to get out there for an hour, 2 hours, and plant this. Or if you do herbs, herbs are medicinal, and parsley grows they all grow like weeds.
Yeah.
They're amazing. And even if you do that and put that into your salad, to me, it's getting the nutrients that you need.
Yeah.
And I always, everyone's taking supplements. Well, I would do a herb garden and cut my herbs every day and be eating them, put them in a green smoothie if that's what you like, or put them in a salad, or, cook with them.
Absolutely.
That's what I do. Every morning I go out to my garden, pick all my herbs, pick my greenery, fry up my garlic and throw the greens in, and then throw the eggs on top, and it's made in 5 minutes. And it gives me the nutrition I need, the protein I need. They're my eggs, by the way. I do have chickens as well. So I have a real passion for this. And it could be because my father was, not my father, but my grandfather was a corn farmer in Iowa, USA. And he had 2 acres of organic companion moon-shaped garden. It was just absolutely amazing garden. And I think maybe that's where the passion came from.
Well, I think, part of my love of good food, if you like, I guess, was, when I in my earlier years, I lived in Orange, and coming from a farming family, if you like, my sister has this beautiful garden, a veggie garden, like you wouldn't believe. So, she grows asparagus and the berries and the corn and as you say, the food tastes different, but not only that, the food scraps get fed to the chooks, and the chooks lay eggs like you wouldn't believe. Whereas I was visiting a mate just a couple of days ago, and he's got a few chooks, 5 chooks. Pretty rare egg layers there, but it's a bare patch of ground. There's nothing there. There's this, well, what are you feeding them so that they can give back to you? So it's this interesting quandary that he's in. Yeah. But
definitely.
I have to touch on, a major player in our food plate, and that is, to the chagrin of so many naturopaths, and I'm still vacillating about where we go. I know we eat too much of it. I know we eat the wrong stuff, but wheat, bread. Now, I've spoken to David Perlmutter. He wants all bread, all wheat gone. I've spoken to Alessio Fasano, a bit of a bromance with that man, but I've spoken to him and he says, look, it's not about all wheat, but we should be thinking about what we do with the wheat. You know, it's all laced with glyphosate and, you know, we've got different genes and we make bread now too quickly. So can we discuss wheat? Because you've actually made a documentary, which we'll get onto in a tick. Let's talk about wheat first. What's the issue? What is the real crux of this?
Wow. That's why I did the documentary, because there wasn't just one answer to it. I think there were major issues with it, but there wasn't just one answer. And it all started for me back about 6 years ago. I was starting to put on weight. Now, I'm a person, like you said in the beginning, I've never had medications. I have eaten well all my life. I've eaten the same foods my whole life, organically as much as possible, made everything from scratch. So I'm getting into my late 40s, early 50s, and I'm starting to gain weight, get aches and pains, sore back, sore hip, anxiety at 3 a.m. And I'm starting to go, what is wrong? What am I doing wrong? And I decided to do an elimination that's based on the winter foods of the hunter-gatherer. So I eat lean meat, greenery, and winter fruits. That's it. I didn't eat anything else. And I ate small amounts because they didn't have a lot of food back then. And I noticed in that 3-week period, I lost 9 kilos in weight. And for the other people out there that do it in pounds, that's about 18 pounds of weight. I lost all my aches and pains, all my anxiety, unbelievable clarity of mind. And when I started to introduce foods back in, everything was going really, really good. And then I had a sourdough bread and I gained 700 grams overnight. That's a lot of water. It's not fat. That's water. Yeah. That says inflammation. I got all my aches and pains back and I went, well, what's wrong with wheat? Because doing cultural anthropology and understanding where wheat lays in our history and, you know, the change from being nomads to people who stayed in one place because we began the agricultural revolution, I was a little bit puzzled. And about a year later, Wheat Belly came out. A year or two later, Wheat Belly came out, and I read that, and then Grain Brain, and so on and so on. And I started to read all the things that had done to wheat. And I'd always been about, you know, have wheat on occasion, don't have it all the time. You know, don't have it for breakfast, lunch, morning tea, afternoon tea, and dinner. I was always about that, but I never took it out of my diet, and I always ate organic. And then when I went through this whole discovery, and I started back at the history of when we started to probably eat more wheat, and that was back in the days of the 1920s when Kellogg's cornflakes came along and breakfast cereals and shelf-stable foods started. And so that was the first time that wheat picked up a major production and the amount of food that we ate that had wheat in it. So that was the beginning. Then they fortified it. So they started to fortify it with, you know, vitamin Bs and minerals. But that fortification wasn't coming from natural foods. It was coming from chemical laboratories and out of the ground. So that was, and then folic acid that's now been, you know, added to the bread. That was added, I think, in Australia in, it was 2000, I think, and something, and that was mandatory in all bread except organic. Yeah. So there's a major issue there when we look at the active form versus the non-active form, but that's just part of the story. And then in the 50s and 60s when Ansel Keys came about and fats were bad and carbohydrates were good, then we left more fats off the table and we started to eat more and more of the wheat. Wheat then became a huge part of our lives because they could make sugar out of wheat. So that's maltodextrose, dextrose, glucose. They can make vitamin C out of wheat. That's ascorbic acid. It starts with wheat. They learnt how to make stramit. I remember I'm from Bendigo, and stramit was huge, and that was the stalks of wheat were used in insulation. So, you know, that started to happen. Vitamins and minerals had wheat in it. We had wheat in medications. You know, some medications where we're now realising that disease should not have any gluten had wheat in it. So it was found in every corner of our lives. And we then had, the hybridization of wheat, which was instigated by Norman Borlaug, and that started in Pakistan and India. And all that was just, a monoculture that required fertilizers, pesticides, herbicides. And and then I think what really drove this was that we started to realize that if we killed the wheat off 3 weeks before harvest, then there would be not as much stalk and there would be more grain and it would be easier to harvest. And what we killed it off with, and this is done in Australia, it's actually done on canola as well, not just wheat. It's done in the wetter areas of Australia as opposed to the drier areas. It's done throughout the US. And so they use Roundup or glyphosate as a desiccant to increase the yield. And so it all came about yield. And so I found that what was happening is that not only were we eating more, we changed the genetic profile by the hybridization. We changed where gluten was on the genome, which is completely spelt out in the book Wheat Belly by William Davies.
Right.
And then we put on that food that was being fed to our animals and to ourselves, we put on a herbicide that we now realise is probably the most destructive herbicide we have ever put in our soils, on our food, and now in our bodies.
And indeed, it wrecks our microbiome.
It's an antibiotic.
Yeah.
That's what it is. And as you consume it, which you will be consuming it, because let's have a look. In 1998, 62,000 million kilos were sprayed worldwide. By 2014, 758,000 million kilos were sprayed worldwide on sports grounds, on verges, on streets, on golf courses, on agriculture, from vineyards to peach trees to canola oil, wheat grain. It's everywhere.
Yeah.
It's become this non-regulated ingredient that, or herbicide that, as Dr. Stephanie Seneff says, and I interviewed her for my documentary, and I have to tell you, as I interviewed her, my jaw was on the floor. I was really upset.
Now, what was this lady's name? Dr. Stephanie?
Her name is Dr. Stephanie Seneff, and she's out of MIT, and she's a senior researcher. And let me paint a picture of her. She's a mum of 4 children. She's a devoted wife. She loves her grandchildren. She was a computer scientist with a biology degree, and she just has degrees everywhere. And she noticed that autism was increasing. And when she started to see, as a computer scientist, the exponential increase in autism, she said something's wrong. And so what she started to do was try and find associations. Okay, what's increased since this year that's increased the exponential amount of, autism that's happening? And she went through everything, and all of a sudden she found an unbelievable correlation with glyphosate. So once she found the correlation, she then went, well, how is it causing the problem? So she got into the biochemistry of it, and what she found was that, number one, it's killing the microbiome. It's stopping the shikimate pathway, which is a pathway that the microbiome does, which produces our aromatic amino acids, which then in turn produces our neurotransmitters. She found that it downregulated the liver in order to get rid of toxins and heavy metals. She found it chelated with our minerals, so we were losing precious minerals out of our body. She saw that because the shikimate pathway was stopped, it actually stopped fructose from being digested, and therefore the fructose went down to the large intestine, and the bacteria started to consume the fructose, creating gas. Maybe even moving up into the small intestine, into the lower part of or the distal part of the small intestine, which we now call fructose malabsorption. And FODMAPs are huge. at the moment. Everybody, like I just had a lady come up to me and did a talk, and she came up to me and she said, my gastroenterologist just put me on FODMAP. And I went, wow, I hadn't heard that happening from a gastroenterologist. So, and I'm just giving you a very, very small snapshot of what she's found in the biochemistry of it. She sees that glyphosate also combines with tissue transglutaminase and gluten or gliadin, and she believes that those three get into the blood system due to the integrity of the intestinal lining being broken and allowing it to get in. And she thinks that's a huge allergenic molecule that has a lot to do with non-celiac gluten sensitivity and autoimmune diseases.
Right. So can I just clear up something in my mind? So the shikimate pathway is not active in humans because it's a bacteria, fungal, algal type thing, yeah?
Plant.
But so it's acting on the plant so that they can't synthesize certain amino acids, and then that affects us. So I'm thinking here about neurotransmitters, tyrosine, tryptophan.
Well, so you've got tyrosine, tryptophan, and phenylalanine that's produced by the shikimate pathway.
Yeah.
Each of them are the precursors to our neurotransmitters. But remember, tyrosine is also the precursor, or not the precursor, but required for T3, T4, reverse T3. Every cell in the body needs tyrosine and 3-iodine, or 4-iodine, or whatever we're looking at there, in order to work. It requires that one's in storage and one's active. And if you don't have tyrosine, you can't make it. And look at the amount of thyroid issues we're now seeing. Stephanie's also, she emails me a lot, because I'm always emailing her and saying, oh my gosh, look what I just found out. And she'll email me back and she'll say, I've just realised that I think glyphosate is replacing glycine in the amino acid chain. And she's finding glyphosate in gelatin because glyphosate's putting itself in the amino acid chain within our collagen, within our bones. And so when gelatin's being made, or you're making bone broth, or you're using bones, and if they're not organic, the possibility of small amounts of glyphosate being in there. And I remember this farmer's wife who was really angry at me. She was a blogger. She was really angry at me for producing the film What's with Wheat. And, her husband was a wheat farmer and used glyphosate. And she says, we only use 1 can, like a Coke can, of glyphosate per acre of wheat.
How often?
I felt like going back to 1 can full of glyphosate per acre of wheat.
Yeah.
And I felt like going back to her and saying, well, we only need 150 micrograms of iodine to make the body run per day.
Yeah.
So don't tell me that 1 can of glyphosate is okay on an acre of wheat. It's affecting our body.
Well, let's say it was 1 can of botulinum toxin. So isn't that dependent on how toxic it is rather than the volume that it is? My dad tells me a story of this old agricultural rep that used to come down the farm, and he swished Dieldrin round in a can with his hands. He said, look, as safe as houses this is. and I still to this day, I don't know how much Dad took it on. He wasn't much given to herbicides and pesticides, but he just shook his head at this bloke. And he just said, you're mad. And this was back in the 60s. Just said, you're mad.
But if you look at DDT in the it started being sprayed in the US. I'm not sure of the Australian or when it started in Australia, but in the US it was sprayed between 1945 and 1955. And there was advertising showing them spraying swimming pools with kids in it. They were spraying DDT everywhere, saying how safe it was.
Yeah.
And we realised that it was a severe neurotoxin that gave symptoms very similar to polio. So it was not safe in any stretch of the imagination. And now Monsanto is saying that, it's only stopped the shikimate pathway, therefore it's not a problem to humans. And I love Dr. Stephanie Seneff, and she also has a somebody that works with her, another scientist that works with her. I was going to say conspirator, but that's what everybody thinks he is. But his name is Anthony Samsell, and he was looking at where does glyphosate go and how is it getting into our body. And with him and mums across America, they did some research where they got the vaccines and sent them to be tested because he believed that gelatin is used. Well, it is. It's not a belief. We know this, that gelatin's used for cultures as well as egg yolk as well as bovine. And he kind of started to think, could it be in the vaccines? And so he got a couple of vaccines, not all of them, but just a couple of vaccines that he knew they used gelatin or egg or bovine on. And he had them tested using, and you and I say this differently, I know. I call it the ELISA, but you call it the ELISA.
Yeah. Different school.
Test, different school. So it's a preliminary test to see if something's contaminated. And it's a preliminary test. And we do more testing if we find that there are traces within the water supply or whatever the medium it's in. We then do more tests. And I've looked at the criticism about finding it's parts per billion that they're finding in the vaccine. But I've looked at the criticism, and nobody's not denying it. They're just talking about the test, saying it's not accurate. Well, if it's not accurate, but we're still finding parts per billion, don't you think it would be feasible that we maybe need to really test this and maybe look at this?
Yeah.
Because maybe they need to be using organic gelatin, organic eggs, and so that it's not contaminated. It's simple. It's not hard to do this. Yeah, this is the issue.
I agree with you there. It's like don't disagree with it, just distract from the issue. And that, look, conspiracy theorist, whatever, there's two sides to it. One is, are you a conspiracy theorist? The conspiracy theorist will tell me, well, just because you're paranoid doesn't mean you're not being followed. So the fact of the matter is that we know big business governments, they don't necessarily disagree or deny. What they do is they distract from the issue. So I agree totally with you. If it could possibly in any way be an issue, shouldn't they be, as a safety mechanism, be testing this or looking into it? At the very least, to be able to refute it? And the fact that they're not rings alarm bells with me. But one other thing I picked up on it, and forgive me for going back a little while, but you were just talking about tyrosine and the shikimate pathway. You're talking about neurotransmitters and things like that. You know what else that I've twigged that tyrosine has an important sort of accessory pathway in the manufacture of? Coenzyme Q10. So it's not just HMG coenzyme A and the mevalonate pathway, but tyrosine has this accessory pathway. So it's just a ponderance there, and I just wonder
it's a great ponderance.
Yeah, that's how, your hydroxybenzoates go into making CoQ10.
And you know what is interesting is when you start to look at pathways and you see, like, let's take the methylation pathway that's in cells, not the DNA, but in cells. And methionine is one of the main amino acids that needs to come in there. And one of the things that Dr. Stephanie Finesse has indicated with glyphosate is that methionine is being stopped by glyphosate. So, you then have to go, we're all on about this MTHFR or the MTRR or the COMT or whatever is in that methylation pathway and the SNP in the genetic profiles of people. You have to wonder, would we have ever found these if we hadn't had methionine missing? And if we had methionine, would then the cycle go well? I look at everything regarding that. And the shikimate pathway is, if you have a look at it, that's where you see in the methylation cycle, you actually see where the neurotransmitters are produced in the methylation cycle. So I think while we are complicating this whole issue by looking at biochemistry and things like that, I think it comes down to we have to go back to the foods that were produced in an organic way. So look at gelatin. There's no way that, and I use a lot of gelatin in my home. There's no way I would use anything but organic gelatin. As far as wheat goes, I would never use the new strain of wheat, but I would consider using the old heritage strains of wheat. So I'm very much now into looking at how do I find the best quality foods that I can be. And I don't think that it's possible now to get completely organic. The way I see my council spray glyphosate around on verges, on sports grounds and down waterways, I'm just not sure that it's possible anymore. But let's at least not saturate ourselves, because glyphosate is something that builds up in the system and creates more and more havoc. So the less you can be exposed to, the better.
Yeah.
And so take the path that we know works, which is we know that our bodies are capable of using these foods that it's used for 1.5, 2 million years while we evolved from Homo habilis to erectus to sapien. And we've only had these issues that we see now raise their ugly heads, I guess, in the last couple of decades, and really in the last 2 decades.
And again, it's glyphosate is the perfect example of the perfect commercialism, isn't it? You know, you need our thing to thrive, and you can't thrive without it because it won't let you. Because so there's this whole sort of quandary about you need to buy the stuff off us. What was interesting about what you said about the ancient wheats is that, and it goes back to right at the beginning how I said you base your stuff on science, and it's just like, well, hang on, have a look at this. So here's something for the doubting Thomases out there: ancient genes to protect modern wheat. Now, this is the University of Queensland from 29th of March 2016. This will be out at Gatton, so outside of the west of Brisbane towards Toowoomba. Scientists from the University of Queensland are undertaking the world first research into ancient wheats to ensure the crop's future. And what they're talking about is the genetic diversity of ancient strains of wheat could hold the key to protecting against diseases in modern wheat. And this is beautiful, I got to say. But how will that, I mean, to me, like one of the issues is yield. You know, because of our population explosion, we now demand more bread, so we need more wheat per kernel, more kernels per shaft of wheat. So therefore, humans are the cause of our own demise, if you like. How do we then access these sorts of ancient grains? Like I mentioned, you mentioned one that you'd accessed down in Melbourne, correct?
Yes, down in country Victoria.
Country Victoria. And there was different...
Yeah, country Victoria.
And you were calling them different names.
Yeah. So einkorn is what we call a monoploid, which means that we know that was the first grain that ever surfaced on the planet as far as the wheat grain goes. So it was about 23,000 years ago. So it's called einkorn, and it's spelled einkorn.
Oh, right,
so,
einkorn, right.
Yeah. So then they reckon about 17,000 years ago, einkorn crossed with another grass naturally, and it became a diploid. So there were, it's not like us where our chromosomes never, we don't change our chromosomes. In plant species, they become, monoploids, diploids, and then who was the original versus, what's been modified. So that was then called emmer wheat, and that's EMMER. And then it continues down to, I think spelt was about 5,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago was kamut. And we became, as agriculturalists, we realised how we could cross wheat, and that was hybridisation. Mm. But what they're doing now with hybridisation is that they're using a chemical, and BASF is the chemical company that uses a chemical in order to create hybrids that don't necessarily naturally hybridize. And it's called clearfield wheat. And to me, this is the scariest wheat of all.
Right.
So what I'm saying is let's go back to the diploid or the monoploid, which is einkorn and emmer wheat. And when I was looking for it, because I have an organic food range. And the reason I have this range is because people would say to me, okay, Cyndi, you talk about this stuff all the time. You talk about this salt and you talk about all of these things, all these foods. We don't know where to find them. And I guess I did it for myself first. I found where I could source the right foods that were organically certified for my pantry. And then I have just shared it with whoever wants it, I guess. I just say, hey, guys, I found it. This is what the research I did behind it, and this is how I found it. And I remember looking for an ancient wheat when I started on this journey. And I found one near your hometown, Orange, but they were using Roundup pre-planting, not after planting.
Right.
But it still could not be organically certified.
Yeah.
I didn't want it. And it was einkorn. It was our 23,000-year-old wheat. So the next one that I found was in England, and we actually imported it from England, which I know is food miles and everything like that, but I couldn't find an organic source here.
Mm-hmm.
And it ended up that coming from England to Australia, we got a confused beetle in the wheat. Oh. So we gave it to an organic food supplier for animals, and they used it. We lost tons and tons of wheat, and we went, okay, well, it's just not possible. We can't do it. And then I always ask the universe, and I know this sounds esoterical, but I do. I go, right, there has to be somebody in Australia that has a passion for this. Yeah. And one day I was looking at in a grocery store in Bright, and it wasn't a grocery store, it was a health food store in Bright. And I'm reading all the wheats, and I'm like going, oh my gosh, this is elk wheat. Where's this coming from? It's coming from Victoria. Wow. And so I rang the farmer. Yeah. I got his phone number and I rang him, and I just went, would you have 5 ton for me? So
5 ton?
I wanted 5 ton because that's how I could sell that easily in a 12-month period. So what he does for me now is that we only grind the grain in 3-month batches. So he holds it for me and I get it in 3-month batches as we need it, because after 3 months, I've still got the germ in there, I've still got the bran in there. I don't take anything out. Mm. So it will go off. So we just take it in small batches, and whereas a whole grain, it has its own preservation. So, but of course, that's another thing that our wheat farmers do here in Australia, is that they gas it in the silos with phosphine and phosphorine, I think it is, which has its own set of problems, even though people say, oh, it's only so many parts per billion, Cyndi, don't worry about it. And I can't go there. I'm like, well, I'm sorry, until you can show me it's safe, instead of saying it's only so many parts per billion, I won't be going there.
Yeah. It's an interesting.
I found him.
It's an interesting double standard. This, forgive me, I'm trying to form this picture in my brain. If you had the same sorts of things happening with, let's say, a herbal medicine. So let's say Carver. What happened with Carver got taken off the market in the sort of early 2000s. And if you had that exact same issue with a drug, let's say paracetamol will still be on the market. Carver's off. Exactly the same thing happened. So, my example here is going to be Pan Pharmaceuticals. Pan Pharmaceuticals made a very rarely used antidepressant, but the message from the TGA was stop taking your vitamins and return them, but continue to take that antidepressant, despite the fact that it was a drug that was found to have a disparity of dosage levels, if you like, within the ingredient levels, in each dosage, in each tablet. No vitamin was found that. It was a drug. Travacam. So it's really interesting, this double standard that occurs, and it's where I'm going with this is it's really hard to get something off the market. You've got to have, it's not compelling, you've got to have solid evidence, because it's almost like a legal thing, isn't it? So, it's like, it's a real shame that we have to go through this, to have to prove something is really damaging before they'll do anything about it.
Yeah. Well, we see this all the time. You look at Bayer, who have taken a bid for Monsanto at $66 billion. And you look at their past and the strength of $66 billion, Carver's never going to make that much money.
No.
But Bayer, they had a statin drug that was causing death. And it took, I think, quite a long time before that finally was removed from the market.
Yeah.
And I look at I just think that we live in a world where money speaks, and as an individual, I can't fight that. I don't have 66 billion to fight that. But what I do have is I am an individual that is able to make my own decisions about what I put my money into. And I think it's an awareness and a knowledge about these companies and about food and about what is really happening out there that educates you enough to make powerful decisions that can change the course of history. And while I feel, and I've said this to you, Andrew, but while I feel that I'm merely at the moment just sorting the deck chairs on the Titanic, that's how I feel. I think there's a gaping big hole in the Titanic and we're all going down unless we start to address that gaping big hole. And the way I address it is that I choose to become knowledgeable, educated about what is happening out there and who owns what company and what sprays are being sprayed on my food and how are vitamins and minerals made and what medication may have gluten in it that may be affecting a disease that somebody is trying to, get rid of or treat even, and yet it's multiplying that effect. And as we do this, I think as a crowd, we will start to change what's happening out there. But most people have blinkers on. Most people aren't even thinking this way. They're not realising that there's more happening out there, and we have to start spending a little bit more money on better foods, understanding how they're produced and saying no to these big corporations that don't really care. I don't know how they don't realise they're doing it to themselves as well.
Oh, most of us, I had blinkers on for decades. Cyndi, practicalities, people need to change and they need to change their habits before they change their life. That's in your book. All of this stuff that we've spoken about is in your book, right?
Well, Changing Habits, Changing Lives, I did in 1998. I wrote that in 1998. And the information for somebody who's starting on their journey is still very, very relevant because it's just about how's breakfast cereal made, what's a different alternative? What do they do to our milk? What's a different alternative? How is our salt refined? What do they add to it? What's a different alternative? So someone starting on this journey, which I'm just not sure that they are the people that are listening in on this. I'm not sure who your listeners, but I have a feeling that they're probably a little bit more advanced than that.
But they still need to know. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of people that don't know where things come from.
Actually, you know what? You are so right. I spoke recently at and I'm not going to say the conference that it was, but it was a health professionals conference. These were people that were very knowledgeable about the human body, about supplementation, about herbs and things like that. And I got given a gift. The gift was chocolate. The chocolate had soy lecithin in it, flavours, colours. Yeah. And I went, hang on, you guys should never have given me this. This should not even be on your shopping list, let alone give it as a gift to a nutritionist who is, can tell you where soy lecithin comes from and what a flavour is. It's 48 chemicals. So, yeah, you're right. People need to know the basics, and even the health professionals out there need to know these basics. But taking it a step further is why I did the documentary What's with Wheat, because what I did was I concentrated on one food and talked about what has happened to these one foods and this one food. And the end of the documentary, I actually say the story of wheat is the story of food. And we need to become educated and wise and make better choices.
I'll hear you that the story of wheat is the story of food. I was actually going to make reference earlier to a paper that's just been released now I keep saying New England Journal of Medicine. It's not, it's JAMA, so the Journal of the American Medical Association. and it's called Sugar Industry and Coronary Heart Disease Research, a historical analysis of internal industry documents. Now, I'll just urge every health practitioner to look that up. We'll be putting it up on the FX Medicine website, and we'll also put Changing Habits, Changing Lives and your new documentary up there, as well as some of the other authors that we've spoken about today. So, it'll certainly give practitioners a lot of food for thought. Sorry, I had to put that in.
And also, I have What's with Wheat on Facebook, and we actually put that article up.
Great.
And I think I put it up on the Changing Habits Facebook. Like, whatever I can do to educate people and read this information, I think is just so important. And that's what you do with, this podcast. I've only just started listening to Andrew, and I'm absolutely loving it. Just your information, the calibre of your guests. I feel very humbled that I'm there with you. So thank you.
You know what? I'll agree with you on one thing. It's the calibre of my guests, and you are one of those, Cyndi. I got to say, I feel so blessed in my job. I am the luckiest bloke on earth because I get to suck the living daylights out of all the minds, of all the greatest minds on earth, and it's truly an honour. So thank you so much for joining us on FX Medicine today and taking us through these very controversial but very, very important issues for what we shove in our mouths every day, food.
Yeah, definitely.
So, Cyndi, thank you so much for sharing your wealth of knowledge to our listeners on FX Medicine today. Truly, humbly thank you.
Thank you.
This is FX Medicine, and I'm Andrew Whitfield Cook. This is Andrew from FX Medicine. We thank you so much for your support over the last 2 years. We'd really love to remain clinically relevant to your practice. So if you know of an expert in some area, please let us know. You can contact us on fxmedicine.com.au, Facebook or Twitter.